Okay, everybody. We are ready to start our next talk right now. I would like you to please welcome Geraldene Dalby Wall, and you will be talking about micro wetlands. It looks like you brought some along with you, so I'll let you get on with it.
Wonderful, yes. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the place and the wonderful care and knowledge that's been passed through to many of us about long-term wetlands and the plants from the local Indigenous people of this area. And I will just quickly flick through so we know what we're looking at. One of the things that wetlands do for us, so if you get the opportunity to go out into your urban wetlands, it really gives us an opportunity to be present. And I find that's been the best way as a so-called wetland scientist, is to look. And it might sound like, what about going to uni? What about everything else? The biggest message for me in the learning has been looking, particularly going out in the pouring rain. So if it's pouring rain and you think you'd like to stay home, the best thing you can do is get down to your local creek or wetland and have a look what's going on. And you might see me there and a whole lot of other wetland crazy people. I definitely like to acknowledge the traditional owners, as I mentioned, because there's so much knowledge that's still coming through today of care for these places, and we have had a history of not necessarily recognising them and the importance, and now we're recognising the importance of wetlands, and you'll see wetlands being built in developments and being built in council parks and being put back, because it's the same as having your own body and having taken, for example, your kidneys out and then expecting it to work well. So the wetlands play a fantastic filtering process. So more than anything, we do need them in our urban places. So we're going to look quickly at some urban wetlands, a little bit about design of those larger wetlands, but how that then influences how to design your own wetlands. And when I say wetlands, it can be something as simple as this one. This is a wetland. It has wetland soils and substrates, it has water, and it has wetland plants. And if I leave it on my kitchen sill long enough, it will have wetland fauna, like some of those wonderful small things we looked at in that last talk. Spiders like this one. That's just who I am. It's really just to say I've had more than 20 years of doing this, but most of it, as I mentioned, is learning from nature and learning from other people who already work in wetlands. The aim of this presentation is to provide some inspiration. If we look at the definition of the word inspire, it's just Latin to mean to breathe. So hopefully you'll feel like breathing. But really, to be inspired to have your own little wetland, as small or large as it is, as many floors up in an apartment building or on the ground, they're all useful. It's about focusing on our relationship to things, and when we can relate to it, as we've seen, you'll often hear this phrase, death by 1,000 cuts. I've heard that for years. Now what I'd like to switch is that we're actually bringing things back in 1,000 pieces. So every little wetland that you create, every habitat diverse frog pond for the different species that you put in, every place that you leave for the spiders, it absolutely does make a difference. Have stories. And I was thinking of this, and then I already had this in the presentation, and I got a little leaflet the other day from Birds Australia, and it talked about just little snippets of people's stories about birds. And it said if you have a story, you keep it. So think of your stories about wetlands. The charismatic creatures are often the ones that we get our stories from. So dragonflies and damselflies are a great example. In many cultures, there's a relationship with animals. For example, if you see a particular animal, it has a particular meaning. Some people might call them a totem or just a reminder. So for us, dragonflies move really quickly. So when we see them, it can remind us of that ability to change. That's something that you can do. You can just go here and go there. There are many stories from Indigenous people about these as well. But just quickly, here's an example. So we have stories from Japan about the animal being a symbol of summer and a guardian spirit of rice plants. We've got the Celtic one where the wee dragonflies carried around the fairies. You see the little fairies up there? And dragonflies are lucky spirit who's thought to have the power to restore health. So who wouldn't want dragonflies in and around their garden? So then we just need to create these little wetland areas for them. More about dragonflies, over 30,000 eye facets, so they can see incredibly well. So if you need to see better, think of dragonfly. Now quickly to wetlands. What makes a wetland? As I mentioned, it can be that simple. Something that's wet. It doesn't always have open water. It will have plants that are characteristic of ones that can handle being soggy for some time. There's lots of examples here of micro-wetlands. So in essence, as I mentioned, that's a micro-wetland. But who thinks they'd have a place for a micro-wetland somewhere in their life? You got a few nods? Yeah. Then we have the big wetlands. So I'm just going to skip through a couple of these types of wetlands to give you a greater knowledge of what we're looking at when we're calling something a wetland. We can have a forested wetland, and that one over in the corner is on the northern beaches, and there still are sugar gliders chewing on the big swamp mahogany trees there. So what we're looking at is the swamp mahogany tree, and here, if you can see those brown lines, that's where the gliders have chewed into the bark of the trees, the sap comes to the front, and then the gliders lick those up. So that's right here, right now, only half an hour or 40 minutes drive away. So that's a forested wetland. We have saltwater wetlands. We have open water wetlands. These are all Sydney urban wetlands. So looking at the freshwater ones, while I'm making it out like there's lots of them, they're actually an endangered community in the Sydney area. So it's extra reason for us to look after them. Now we've got that topic of build it and they will come. This is a green and golden bell frog habitat creation in Kurnell. And that big mama there, I'm assuming she's a big mama. Would that be right if it's a big one? Yeah, maybe. There's a nod from the expert. It's good. She came down to see what was going on. They were meant to be in an exclusion area, but obviously they decided to have a look. So this is the creation of habitat. Now it doesn't have to be in a big development like that. Habitat for frogs also means somewhere that they can overwinter. So if you don't have an open water, you might at least have a grassy area with some rocks or a terracotta pipe. You know the old terracotta pipes they used to use for plumbing? They're such good animal habitat. Blue-tongued lizards, frogs, all of them. If you could leave a little corner somewhere with one of those pipes where it gets nice and warm, you would be greatly appreciated by wildlife. Sydney Park. Has anyone been to Sydney Park lately? Yep, a couple. So there's a lot of work that went on there to change it from just a normal set of wetlands, which is more like a bath, to put a lot of habitat around the edges and what we call rain gardens. So it's cleaning the stormwater, but it's also meant that now we have habitat that links up for frogs and reptiles to move between those ponds. It also meant during the works, I had to go through and move the frogs. So next time any of you young people who are interested, I needed so many helpers that day, getting the frogs and putting them in a safe place so we could bring them back when the work was finished. Wangle Park. So if anyone goes to Burwood, this example is just to show again a super urban area with a little pocket of wetland, which again has frogs and a lot of wildlife in it. But it's also to show this is the sort of thing you can do at home. They're small. You'll hear more about mosquitoes. You can manage these so they don't have mozzies, because when I look at that, I first think of mozzies. How many other people thought of mozzies when they saw it? Yeah, a couple. Yes. Riverwood. So again, we can, if you have a place in somewhere around you that's just like a drainage line that's not really all that awesome, keep a vision, because you can work with your local council and other agencies to transform things. So that's just a change from a drain to a wetland. Same with this one. So it was It's in a building. This is part of a high-rise building. This is about 5 floors up. This is when it was being used as a sediment detention basin. And then after that was meant to be. And then when the construction was finished, it was converted into a wetland, as you can see here. And we had all of these little animals coming by themselves. Some may have come with the plants that we put there, but now it's a thriving ecosystem of wetland and plants 4 stories up. Cup and Saucer Creek, who's familiar with that one? We've got a couple. So again, all Sydney wetlands, quite close. Well before this, it was an amazing, natural, open, rushing creek. Then 150 or so years of no care, or the reverse of care, and now we're starting to fix it up. So I don't want to sound like we're just doing all great. We sort of went one step back to come forward. But this again has a lot of examples that you can copy in your small home wetlands. Now my aim was just to flick through the next 10 slides, which are just images of sort of before and after projects of all Sydney wetland and what you can do with your micro one. So here's a micro one in a bathtub. The great thing about a bathtub or a sink is that you can pull the plug. Mosquito larvae usually take around 5 days to turn into mozzies. You can pull the plug if you need to. Catch your tadpoles and put them back in. Let the wrigglers go. Dragonflies are wonderful, and damselflies, and they've fallen off. I did actually have, on some of the plants we had by the pond, I had some dragonfly nymphs that had come out. Now the interesting thing is, how long do people think dragonfly larvae live underground? It's like 1 year, 5, 2 weeks, up to 7 years. So if you've got them in your pond, they're around being absolute voracious predators. The front face of a dragonfly was used to make that movie, used to copy to make the animal predator in that movie. That's the front of a dragonfly face. It actually spits its bottom lip out and catches things and brings it back in. So if you'd like some of those around you, small size, habitat. Now I have this plant here, Nardoo. This one, really lovely 4-leaf clover water plant, and as you can see it there floating. These are all native water plants, so I highly recommend if you are getting ponds or anything, please use native, because a lot of our work is taking weeds out of wetlands, and so many of them have come from people being finished with their pond and going and letting it out. Nardoo is a bush tucker food. It creates a whole lot of bulbs that are a very protein-rich powder.
The pink one, is that a native, the one in the middle?
Yes, it is. There are exotic natives that look very similar, but that one is a native. There's also exotic yellow ones, like all through botany wetlands. So it's good to find out, yes, there are native, definitely native pink ones. You'll see quite a lot on the north coast.
Does the Nardoo have big leaves?
No, that's the biggest the Nardoo gets is this one. That's it, fully grown.
What's the one with big leaves but small white flowers?
There's one called Otelia, has maybe that size leaf.
Is that a native?
That's a native, and that's the flower of Otelia there.
Well, I thought of one, but yeah. Thanks.
Welcome.
It was on Geraldene. In patches.
So these are plants, just to inspire you to ask for natives. I'm happy after this to, if you want to give me your email even, I've got a whole list of native plants with their names. Or just ask me. So we talked about dragonflies. There's a whole lot of beautiful plants that you can put in your wet areas. So also think about your Sydney sandstone bog plants. So that's even your ones that eat animals. The Drosera will go around the edge if you make a muddy edge. Here's some just examples of the small ones. You'll hear more about the importance of having water mixing if you don't want mozzies. But as I mentioned, even the bathtub, put logs around. Logs are so good around wetlands, especially if you want the native reptiles back. Mozzies, you're going to have a talk just about those, but this is just a quick photo to show there are so many different types of mozzies, and only a few of these bite you. the key thing is about having places where their larvae can't get oxygen. So that's mosquito larvae with their tails getting oxygen. And the other thing around your wetlands and ponds is what we've learned is so much is about the interaction of things. And wetlands happen to provide a wonderful place for butterflies. So if you can include around your bog or pond some of the plants that the butterflies use, your open area of your wetland, which is then usually sunny, can be used as a basking area for the butterflies. So I've seen that in quite a few places, the butterflies moving in after we've got the wetlands established. Now we're close to the end. Yeah, this bit's just the picture bit for ideas. As I said, part of the aim is to inspire. Habitat considerations, avoid mosquito fish. If someone says put some in, they'll eat your mozzies. They eat tadpoles, they eat everything. This is much better to eat your mozzies, the dragonfly larvae. And if you're interested, there are lots of places that do more talks and walks about dragonflies and that connection. So again, find out from us. And there we go, lots of them. But it's also to acknowledge these guys. So the swamp hen, I think we're on our last bit now. The swamp hen is a wonderful charismatic bird which in the large wetlands can tend to pull out a whole lot of plants, and they won't do it if it's in your wetland or your wetland that's, you know, even on your windowsill. So if you can build wetlands, it's actually helping us, because a lot of these places, the big ones, do get mosquito fish and they do get birds that pull things out. So your little wetlands, as I mentioned at the beginning, putting things back in 1,000 pieces really helps, because all those big projects I showed, they're not getting all the results because of things like mosquito fish and constant predation. But your micro wetlands can help all of these. So that's the end of today's presentation. So if you do want to know more about any of the water plants or where you can get them, you'll find me by the pond after the talks.
Perfect, thank you so much.